one of the things we always want to do here at IT Visionaries is kind of understand some of the things you're working on now at companies that you're at. But VMware is such a huge company. We would assume most people would know what it does, but maybe not, because it's one of those products where it's like everything's built using VMware, but the end customer often doesn't use what you guys do. VMware is a massive company. If you could really quick, just kind of tell our audience, what is VMware? What does it do?
Well, I think if folks have heard of VMware, oftentimes it's for some of the stuff we've been doing for 15 plus years now, right? Our core virtualization capabilities, things like vSphere and now VMware Cloud Foundation. And of course, that sort of core infrastructure capability is still going. But we've dramatically expanded our focus. And really what we're looking at now is all things multi-cloud. This notion that you've got workloads running in many of the major public clouds, maybe all of them, as well as some stuff in your data centers, maybe some stuff at the edge. And sort of how do you manage, build, deploy, run, et cetera, applications across all those things? And that's really what our focus has evolved into. And so we do that across infrastructure. We've got security products. We've got management. We support development of modern applications. We support end user access and security and so forth. So really running the gamut across there.
And give us an idea for the audience members who are more technical, what are some of the massive changes in your field? Because I think when I started learning more about software development back in the early 2000s, and you would need virtual machines because you didn't have or couldn't afford to spin up enough hardware to run different applications or tests.
Yep.
So you would need to virtualize it and see it through and see if it worked, and then before it was given to the consumers. We also saw it I did consulting work for the government at one point. So we would have I always tell this story, but BAE Systems was one of my clients, which is the maker of the tanks. And everything you ran was on virtual machine. Like you could, even though you had a physical laptop, you had no software on your laptop. It was like nothing was yours. So there was more like security things for it. What are some like the modern use cases? Because as hardware's gotten better, you would think that you wouldn't need virtual machines, but we do, because we just now make the virtual machine even more insane.
Well, the whole cloud is based off of virtualization, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's exactly it. It's kind of the abstraction has sort of moved up the stack a little bit. When we were first getting started, the fact that you could even create a virtual machine was, already a technical feat in and of itself, right? But now really what we've moved to is, as an industry, how do we best leverage this underlying technology? And I think probably, the biggest shift that we've seen in the past 10 years, 10, 15 years now, is the advent of the sort of cloud design and this notion of self-service, of just being able to call an API to get what you want. And the reality is, if that's the interaction model that you have, and it's a great one, by the way, then fundamentally you have to have software constructs behind that you can't be, waiting for someone to like rack and stack a machine. It's got to just be software that responds to that API call so it can do it and, respond instantaneously. And so I think that's really been the big thing that we see now. So when I look at and talk to customers, what I often see is that, they're fighting many different battles, or many different fronts of the battle, maybe we could say, that they've got a lot of their traditional apps that are still in the data center, that they have virtualized, but still operate in a more traditional sort of IT model, kind of what you're talking about, right? And there's people are still filing tickets and everything, and they've got a whole different set of apps that are running in the cloud, and these things are designed to be more modern, to be more API centric, et cetera. And they have these kind of two worlds, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I manage across these things? How do I bring my more traditional apps, my heritage apps forward and integrate them more deeply with the more modern apps that I'm creating? And how do I manage that? How do I secure that? One of the biggest things that I hear today from folks on the security front is really around software supply chain security.
Yeah.
So that's a really top of mind one. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with SolarWinds and that sort of attack from a couple of years ago. What happened there fundamentally was that hackers broke into their build system and attacked the build system. So the code was fine, but by the time a binary came out after being built, it actually had some malicious code inserted into it. And this is something that everyone's really worried about now, because it is becoming more and more common. So the question is then, okay, like how do you start to manage that between, again, your traditional apps and your modern ones? So that list kind of goes on and on there, right? But that's kind of just a short sampling of what I see to be the big sort of changes that are driving the industry right now.
And you've been at VMware, it looks like, for most of your career, or if not all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious.
All of it right now. I'm a lifer so far here.
Not a problem. When you see like the demand, like you said, it used to be VMs were done on a local level. Now they're moving up the tech stack, if you will. Who has been the driver of this? Has it been? Would you say it's your company? Like you guys have engineered solutions for this to make this capable, or have the developers themselves been pushing and asking you over these years, like, hey, I need to be able to virtualize. Well, what if we could virtualize this? And then they come up with grander
Yep.
ideas. What if we could do this? This could unlock that. Who's been like just driving, or has it been more like a symbiotic? We've been pushing it together.
Very symbiotic. Yeah, I was going to say there's a whole ecosystem at play here, right? I do think that, what we saw, I remember talking to customers in the late 2000s doing some of this early sort of cloud stuff, if you will, which is just, tremendous focus on automation and doing that, on top of our software, and that sort of enabled them to go and do this and develop some of those patterns. Clearly, public clouds coming out and with the approach that they have help to facilitate that as well. I think that you look at other sorts of technologies like containers and Docker when it first came out in 2013, 2014, and to see where that's sort of headed now with Kubernetes. So all these things are sort of built on each other. And I think what's interesting, though, is that even though you do see a lot of these different technologies coming out, you see a lot of times the same problems that people need to deal with, right? It goes back to the core things of like, how do you operate these things and how do you secure them? And how do you provide some level of governance, guardrails, if you will, for folks? And so I think what's challenging is that how do you as an administrator, someone running this for a company, keep up with all the latest technologies? I think that's one of the big challenges that we're seeing as well.
Like how do you see the best case? You're right. Well, that is the problem. What's like some best practices you see? Because you're in this interesting space because not only are you guys building and engineering products and solutions for tons of companies to leverage, but you're also seeing what they're potentially, you're seeing what they're making, right? You're seeing in how they're attacking it and how big companies with big, huge, innovative concepts, how are they bringing this to life? And of course, sometimes they're going to need new features of which they're going to ask you, Kit, speed dial 1, Kit, I need to be able to do this, right? And a lot of times we don't know what the limits are until we actually try to build and we feel like we're roadblocked. So what are you seeing from your perspective as like, hey, managing technology is going to become more challenging, but this is a good process to follow. What are some like the process and procedures you've seen working pretty good?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to providing the right levels of optionality for a business. So what do I mean by that? Well, there are many different ways to tackle a problem, and it to some degree depends on the disposition of a company, where they are, where they're trying to go from a technology strategy standpoint. So for instance, one of the things we did when we saw the rise of containers was say, hey, folks who use vSphere or things like VMware Cloud Foundation, they've operationalized around virtual machines. And containers in many ways aren't that different from VMs. I mean, there's a whole bunch of difference in terms of how they can be used. But in terms of managing them, we've actually been able to extend vSphere to be able to manage these container technologies. And so the idea there being, well, if you're already good at doing this with VMs, you can kind of seamlessly extend to containers. So that's one option. And maybe that's the right option for a certain set of customers or companies. But then we also say, hey, we also see people leveraging a lot of the native container tools across the public clouds. And what they will end up doing is doing things a certain way in AWS and things a certain way in Azure and things a certain way in Google. And all of a sudden they've got 3 different teams using these native container tools in 3 different ways. And there's all sorts of duplication and lack of consistency and lack of things like security, secure software supply chain, some of the stuff we just talked about. And so for there, what we want to do is be able to provide technologies that enable a customer to drive consistency across there. So for instance, you look at what we're doing with our Tanzu portfolio, and that's really trying to say, hey, we can provide you a consistent Kubernetes experience across clouds, as well as a consistent developer experience across clouds as well, allowing developers to take advantage of the good things the cloud has, but ensuring some base levels of security, process, automation, governance, etc. in the process there. When I look at our overall strategy from a company standpoint, really what we're doing is providing these different layers of consistency, or you could say layers of abstraction across public clouds. And those would be things like infrastructure consistency, things like DevSecOps consistency, things like developer experience consistency, and user experience consistency, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. But I think that is really where I see customers getting more optionality, because when they are able to implement those layers of consistency properly, then another cloud comes along, or you have a new sort of edge location, everything happening in the telco space with 5G. like they'll be able to more seamlessly extend that architecture to those new environments. And I think that's really, getting back to the point, it's like it is an architectural type of approach, that you want to have an architecture that gives you that flexibility and optionality to more seamlessly consume new technologies as they come out.
Hey, thanks for watching. This segment is brought to us by Salesforce Platform. Visit salesforce.com/newsletter to discover timely insights and useful tips tailored to your role. Subscribe to this channel and get more great IT and tech interviews with top industry leaders.